In the 1980s, on Redwood Road near Taylorsville, Utah, about 15 miles south of Salt Lake City, there once stood an old red brick mansion that had been built in the latter 1800s. The home was situated on a 2-acre estate, which had once been much larger in its heyday, and was wooded with ancient trees and rose bushes with patches of wheat and other cereal crops from the days when it had been a working farm. All the locals in the area knew of the old red mansion, as it had become a landmark, even though it had stood abandoned and neglected for many years. It was situated in a prime real estate location on the corner of Redwood Road and the entrance to I-215. My dad and I often spent time on the old estate metal detecting and digging around the old dump site, which had spilled into a dry creek bed on the northeast side of the home. Old bottles, tools and other gadgets from between 1890 and 1940 were often collected. While probing around the old home, we often had a feeling of being watched by someone, even though there was no one around and had long since acquired permission to be there. There was no power on the property, but on certain occasions one of the rooms on the second level on the southwest side of the home would seem to be lit up through the broken window, as if a light had been left on. The room had a subtle glow that stood out from the rest of the windows, even in broad daylight. I figured it was just a play of light refracting from different angles into the room from other windows, but it was definitely noticeable. One day, while probing around trying to locate where the old outhouses had been placed, which were commonly used to throw trash and empty bottles into, I turned around to pick up my metal detector, and in my peripheral vision I swore I saw a woman standing on the balcony beneath the window that had often been oddly illuminated. She appeared to be in a creamy-colored dress. I quickly did a double take, but there was no one there. I chalked it up to a reflection of sunlight and got back to locating the outhouse pits. In 1985 I met my second wife who, as I would learn over the next 10 years of marriage, had an uncanny psychic ability, often to the point of annoyance. Trudy could take someone's hand and know almost everything about them by receiving impressions on an emotional level. I could never get away with anything. She could take my hand and know exactly what I had been up to. I had often enlisted Trudy's talent for treasure hunting projects, and while I would not always find what I was looking for, the land she described would be startlingly correct, even though I knew for a fact she had never once been into such remote areas. Moreover, she would correctly state certain events that would occur during the outing and gave advice on how to avoid them. It had taken some time before I learned to trust her, but before then nearly every event she claimed would happen did in fact happen. The old red mansion became a special place for us as Trudy would often accompany me and my dad and mom metal detecting. While my dad and I would be digging around in the dirt for lost trinkets from another time, Trudy would calmly walk around the property with a seeming reverence, sensing the history of its past. She came to love the old place and felt it had mostly been a happy home except for one dark moment early on in its history. Someone died here very young, she had told me. But there is a woman here who I think was the person's sister. While still dating, during the early part of our relationship, I was working evenings for a company called Bank Jet Devarian, which was a fleet of Lear jets and King Airs utilized for transporting processed checks from wherever they had been cashed back to their bank of origin. The company was based in the executive terminal on the east side of the Salt Lake International Airport. Trudy would commonly accompany me to work since it gave us time to be together in the evening. While we waited for the aircrafts to arrive with the canceled checks, we would watch the TV series MASH on the lobby television. Once the checks arrived, the work really began. They all had to be rushed to the Federal Reserve Bank of Salt Lake to be processed and timestamped before 12 midnight to be guaranteed the interest payment for that day. Missing the deadline could result in millions of dollars in lost revenue, and the winter time would always be a nightmare with late plane and snow and ice on the road. One night, while heading out to work, Trudy and I stopped on Redwood Road in front of the old red brick mansion. We had come to adore the old place. Trudy and I considered buying it and making a bed and breakfast out of it. It was even large enough to live in with easy freeway access and ample parking. We had stopped there on my way to work one evening after making a decision to try to buy it earlier in the day, and we wanted to envision what we would do to it. It was after dark, around 9 p.m., but the street lights cast the front of the old home in a soft glow. There was a veranda around the front with steps leading to the entryway, which was mostly dilapidated and overgrown with vegetation and shrubs. Above, on the second level, were bay windows on both sides and a balcony that was accessed from a door that had long since been bricked up. While sitting there dreaming of what to do and what it would all cost, Trudy suddenly and calmly said, "John, leave now." "What?" I asked her. Trudy pointed at the shadowy entry of the old home. "Leave, go, get out of here now," she said loudly. She was clearly panicked and I had no idea why, but she thoroughly scared me with her unprecedented tone. So I slammed the gearbox of my Dodge Ramcharger into drive and stepped on the gas. Trudy screamed out, "Hurry, she's coming." I was still mystified by everything going on, but as the Ramcharger spun dirt into the air upon leaving, I glanced quickly back in the direction of the old home. For a brief flash I thought I saw a young girl standing in the overgrown yard. She had long blonde hair and was in a pale blue dress. It was just a brief microsecond that I saw her because I had refocused my attention on navigating off the dirt shoulder and back onto the road in traffic. A few seconds later I was turning onto the northbound I-215 freeway entrance heading to the airport without decelerating. Trudy was now sitting in the front seat beside me facing backward, looking back in the direction we had come from. She was pressed into me so tight I could barely operate the steering wheel. Now panicked I said, "What the hell was that all about?" Trudy had never acted that way before, and I knew she would not have been afraid of some hijacker or someone attempting to rob us because I was always armed and had no problem about defending myself and property. "She's in the back seat," Trudy said without taking her eyes off whatever she was looking at. "What? Who is in the back seat?" I was now feeling very creepy because of Trudy's actions. "The little girl from the house. Didn't you see her coming?" Suddenly, a memory of a little girl I thought I had seen came back to me. I thought I saw a little girl as we left. She was standing in the yard, wearing a long blue dress. Trudy further defined the girl. White flowers on her collar, and blonde hair. My mind was reeling. There really was a girl there, and Trudy had also seen her. What was a young girl doing out that late? Was she lost? Was she coming to ask for help? Had she been raped or abducted and finally managed to escape? If so, why were we now speeding down the freeway away from her instead of helping her? I didn't understand. I put the question to Trudy. Why did we leave her? Maybe she needed help. Trudy spoke calmly. "We didn't leave her. I told you, she's sitting in the back seat." My hair stood on end and a shiver raced through my spine. Trudy was serious. I looked in the rearview mirror cautiously, really not wanting to see anything, and there was nothing there. I asked, "Do you still see her?" Trudy answered, "No, but I know she's here. I can feel her." At this point an event took place of which Trudy would not let me live down through the years of our marriage. The windows were rolled up and there was no air circulating through the cab of the vehicle. There was plenty of light from the street lights and oncoming headlights. Suddenly a handful of Trudy's long dark hair lifted up and out as if someone had reached out gently but curiously and grabbed it. I saw it clearly. Trudy screamed and swiped at the air with her hand and shook her head wildly. Perhaps it was a subconscious self-preservation instinct reaction, but I had flung open the driver's door and stood standing up on the edge of the running board ready to leap from the vehicle, which was cruising at over 60 miles per hour. One hand still held the steering wheel while attempting to navigate onto the emergency lane. Other vehicles nearby honked and swerved around me. Finally, I came to my senses and sat back onto the seat and steered off into the emergency lane. When the vehicle had come to a stop, Trudy and I both jumped out and moved away from the Ramcharger as if it were going to explode. Trudy ran towards me, and I opened my arms to comfort and protect her, but I had already proven where my loyalties lay. Trudy started beating on my chest and slapped me. "You were going to leave me. You were going to jump out and leave me alone in the truck, you son of a bitch." Trudy had never swore before. I tried to explain that I was only trying to get a better look in the back seat. When that excuse failed, I assured her that I had every intention of grabbing her before I jumped. But she knew the truth. I was scared to death and was going to bail on her. Chivalry went right out the open door when faced with something unknown sitting in my back seat. The atmosphere had been tense to begin with, but when I had seen Trudy's hair lift up, and when she had screamed, primordial flight or fight instincts took over. I chose flight. My grandfather, who once managed a cemetery where I heard a baby crying while helping a crew dig a set of new graves, told me that the only people I had to fear was the living. Funny, I don't fear something I can shoot at. But where to begin defending oneself, or fiancé, from something you can't even see, but can obviously see you? As stated, Trudy never let me live that down, and whenever ghost activity occurred in our life together, which was frequent, she would assure that she would protect me. It took that night and the next day to settle down from the strange occurrence, and although I never seen the little girl in our home, Trudy claimed she had come to live with us. I had no reason to doubt her because of several ghostly events that had taken place. Trudy is a gentle and compassionate person with a strong motherly nature. I surmised that the girl had come because she was lost and confused and was drawn to Trudy to protect her. Some months had passed and I was back out at the Red Mansion again, detecting and digging for old trinkets. The house itself was not locked and the back door had been completely broken off. I enjoyed walking around inside and climbing up the steep stairwell to the second level and looking out of the big bay windows over the property. I had never felt scared inside, but never again went back after dark. Trudy and I gave up on the idea of buying the place, and it was ultimately bulldozed down many years later for want of an owner. On one occasion, while I was wandering through the old home, I started to go upstairs when I felt a sudden cold feeling. In that moment, I envisioned a girl in a blue dress tripping and tumbling down the stairs to her death. At the top of the stairs, a woman screamed and quickly ran down after her. The whole image played in my mind, and not actually a true vision, but rather it was as if something had planted the image there. When I got home, I told Trudy about what happened and that I think I knew how the little girl died. She fell down the steep wooden staircase and broke her neck. For Trudy, the little girl became a part of the family. Trudy was aware when she was around, and many times I smelled the scent of wild roses. Wild roses had grown all over the old mansion's estate. When it was decided to move to Arizona, Trudy knew the little girl would be coming. In July of 1987, Trudy's company, Mountain Bell, transferred her to their Tempe, Arizona branch. Trudy went on ahead while I and the children stayed back to sell the house. We joined her a month later and moved into a condominium in Mesa just off Southern and Country Club. The little girl did indeed follow us there. Our youngest daughter could be heard playing and having conversations with someone in her room, and oftentimes we heard things being moved around in the room when she was at school. When we inquired of who she was playing with, she said it was her friend, Maybella. Maybella, as she was known from then on, loved the dolls, and often the room would be filled with the smell of wild roses. One night, my wife and I were awakened by someone knocking on our bedroom door. We thought it was one of the kids, but no one answered when we invited them in. Instead, someone was turning the doorknob and seemed to be pressing against the door. Suddenly, I thought an intruder may be in the house. I removed an old Colt 45 from the top of my closet and opened the door. The Colt wasn't loaded, but it would have been sufficient to warn anyone off. I had been nervous because of a project I had been working on to do with a lost treasure in a nearby mountain, an experience I would write into a book many years afterward. As a result, I had attracted the attention of some unsavory people into my life who were more than curious as to what I had discovered at Red Mountain. When I opened the door, no one was there. The air was filled with the scent of roses. Trudy said, "It's Maybella, but you scared her away with the gun." Sorry. Due to events directly relating to my research at Red Mountain and the Lost Dutchman mine, as told in my book, Quest for Pearl to Gold, A Hidden History of Red Mountain, Trudy and I ended up leaving Arizona the following October in 1988 and returning back to Salt Lake City. Trudy had come to love Red Mountain and very much felt the presence of spirits there whom she would seem to have a one-way conversation with. Red Mountain had become her sanctuary away from the city and work and the problems building in our life. Before we left, Trudy said she wanted to visit Red Mountain one last time. On the drive out, which was a solemn drive, Trudy said the little girl was with us. After wandering about in the solitude of the mountain's shadow and saying goodbye to a place that had become a focal point in our life, we left. But the little girl, who had once entered my Ramcharger and scared the hell out me and Trudy 3 years earlier, had, apparently, chosen to remain at Red Mountain. Trudy told me on the way home that the spirits of Red Mountain, of the Native Americans, who had once lived and worshipped there, had taken Maybella into their care. Perhaps so, for I never again smelled the scent of the wild roses which had been synonymous with Maybella, not even when revisiting the Red Mountain many years later for photos to put in my book. Perhaps you might remember the old red mansion that once stood on Redwood Road near the on-ramp to I-215. If you do, and have similar stories, share them in the comments below.